with your thumbs down, brother.
Go.
This is Harlem Transformation Project, raw and uncut, with your host, Akil Rose. We're having today a brother by the name of Joseph Jazz Hayden, who is a warrior of Harlem and also a healer. He's an expert on the subject of the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration. We're having him today because he's an expert in his field, and we want him to come and give us just some information that we need to have, that we need to interject in the community. So, Joe, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Akil. Thank you for having me here.
Oh yeah, well you Jazz, but the kind of work you do in the community, you need a manicure. You got dirty fingernails, meaning that you always work with your hands. You don't just sit up in the ivory towers and talk a bunch of intellectual masturbation, so to say, or lecture all the time and do seminars. I see you in the streets.
Yes.
You in the streets. You on podiums. You speak. You also be in the streets with your sharpshooter, and that's that camera.
That's right.
And you keep them rolling with all things. What's the name of your film company? Is All Things Harlem,
Yeah,
correct?
still here, Harlem Productions.
Yeah, Harlem Productions. And then along with that, just your a wide experience and knowledge base of the subject of mass incarceration.
Yes.
After reading Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, I said I have to find some people that's in New York who can give us some more concrete information about that, and your name was right at the top of the list. So you're here today. Can you tell us, you can tell your story better than I. Tell us
All right.
a little
Well,
bit about yourself.
I'm a Harlem resident by birth. Born in Harlem Hospital and raised here. Spent my whole life here, and have pretty much gone through all of the things that young black men in Harlem go through. Which is the streets. I mean, failed schools, the streets, and the criminal justice system. It's been a very interesting life that I've led. But to get right to the subject that we're here to talk about today, as a result of my experiences in places like Attica during that rebellion, before it, I was a major organizer at that time in Attica. And I came out, and I've been kind of politically conscious and socially conscious all my life, in spite of some of the things that I got caught up in. Right? But I read Michelle Alexander's book, and the information in it to people that have been, socially conscious, people that follow the history of African Americans in America, was nothing new, in the sense that the information had been coming out piece by piece.
Yes.
But the brilliance that she brought to this project, to the understanding of this information, was the fact that she connected all of the dots, with this information. And she coming from the historical perspective, she showed how the practices in this country that we generally refer to as Jim Crow, that followed the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, freeing the slaves, making them citizens, and ensuring that they had the right to vote, were circumvented. The pushback against these gains by former slaves was the system of Jim Crow, which essentially was designed to disempower the former slaves, by keeping them from the ballot box, essentially.
That's right.
And so we fought that battle from I think maybe about 1877, when they had what was called the Southern Compromise. There was a battle going on between the Democrats and the Republicans, and the Republicans were the party of Lincoln. And the election was one of them close elections like Bush-Gore. But they reached a compromise. It was Tilden Hayes, and I forget the other party. Anyhow, they agreed, the Republican Democratic Party agreed that they would let the Republicans have the presidency in return for removing all their troops from the South, right?
Yeah.
And once the northern troops were removed from the South, the former plantation owners and the supporters of slavery
Went back to their work.
went back to work.
That's right.
You understand? But prior to that, we had more black elected officials in the history of this country.
Senators and all. That's right. That's right.
And so by withdrawing the northern troops from the South, this permitted the Southern Democrats to wipe out all those political gains. So, by 1903, I think, there was one black elected official left in the country, definitely in the South. Man.
And what was he, a senator or a congressman or what?
I think he was probably in the House of Representatives,
Yeah.
But before that, we were, on every level of the political structure, we were represented. And so this was a product of the new Jim Crow. This is where the old Jim Crow came into being. And they passed laws in all of the Southern legislators that would help to criminalize blacks, right? Because the 13th Amendment has an exception clause in it.
That's right. That's right.
Slavery is abolished except for those duly convicted of a crime.
That's right.
Right. So we went from the private ownership of slaves to the state ownership of slaves.
The legal ownership.
The legal state ownership of slaves, right? And so slavery continued to exist in this country, and it continues to exist today because of that exception clause in the 13th Amendment, right? But Jim Crow was on the ground, and we've seen these the numbers. I don't even have the numbers for the lynchings that took place, to enforce this separate, equal paradigm that was put in place and certified by the Supreme Court of the United States in a case called Plessy versus Ferguson. Right?
That's right.
So anyhow, we struggled with this Jim Crow until 1954 with Rosa Parks rebelling and refusing to give up her seat, and then we got the Supreme Court decision in that. I don't remember exactly the citation right now. It slips my mind. But anyhow, that ended school segregation. And then it's
Brown versus Board of Education.
Yeah, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And then we moved on to the Civil Rights Movement. Grew out of that. In 1964, we had the Civil Rights Act passed, and then we had the Voting Rights. In 1964 and 1965, we had the Voting Rights Act passed. So they removed all the barriers to the ballot box that formerly existed. But when they got to the prison wall, they stopped.
That's right. That's right.
You understand? And because they stopped at the prison wall, the pushback, because with every step we make, every gain we make, there's always that pushback, right? And the pushback in this case was the expansion of the population behind the prison wall.
With us.
So in 1970, we had something like 300,000 prisoners in the United States. But by 2011, we got 2.3 million, and all of them are essentially disenfranchised. Then we got another 5 million on probation and parole that are also in some states disenfranchised, right? And parolees for the most part are, in all states are disenfranchised. And so they accomplished what they had set out to do under the old Jim Crow. And Michelle Alexander writes this book and explains how we got to where we got.
Well, that's what I find interesting, because what I like about her book is that it's a median there. Like Malcolm used to say, make it plain to the people. He used to always ask the question, well, did you make it plain? And she makes it very, very clear. She makes it, matter of fact, crystal clear. I mean, not just on the high intelligentsia side, but also where a high school student can understand what she's saying. Because she's talking directly to you. She's just telling a story. And historians would enjoy the book, politicians would enjoy the book, but also attorneys. She is an attorney herself. And she goes through a place in Brown versus Board of Education and Drew Scott, and she goes through all these different decisions and legislations and coincide with the history that she's dealing with.
Yeah.
From slavery to post-slavery, all the way to Jim Crow, civil rights, and like you said, but she takes you through the law and the legislation as it goes. So it's kind of like a story, but she intertwines it.
Yes.
So but I also looking at how it made it very clear though how you can see the transition where it can be called the new Jim Crow, because once you are incarcerated of a felony, you up under the servitude of the state.
Exactly.
You know, and the catch is once you get out, in many states, many of the different rights that you had before you were previously incarcerated, you don't have any longer. So you put back into second-class citizenship. And then she goes through the history of also the heroin epidemic, of how that was utilized to stimulate the incarceration of masses of people of color. Then the crack epidemic, you know, and then now the continuation of that. So that's, you know, it's very, 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 very clear of how she explains that. I wanted to ask you something, though, from reading this book. It's on page 211, Joe. And it's, I wanted to ask you about rethinking denial, or where have the civil rights advocates you need when you need them? Now, asking where have all, you know, the civil rights advocates that we used to have in the past, you know, we see what's happening with them right now, and many of them are still active. You know, I take my hat off to anybody that gets their hands dirty. I have nothing bad to say about them. They may have a different way that they're attacking the mission, but we have a common goal and collective. But a lot with this issue with mass incarceration, I don't hear a lot about mass incarceration. Now, where are they at on this issue? And do you have an explanation why you think that might be, or do you think they're there? Or just give me your take on that.
Well, I think she makes it plain in the book, and it's also, like I say, none of this information is really new. I wrote a paper in 1993 dealing with the issue of powerlessness of prisoners. You know, in prisons, the administrators have 100% of the power, and prisoners have 0, right? And so I had put together a think tank to do the research, the historical research on how we got to this situation. Right? And after we did this research, it became clear to us that this power relationship had to be changed. And as a result of it, as a result of our research, we found out that in 4 states in the United States, prisoners were allowed to vote from their cells, right? You know, so they never lost their right to vote.
And what states were they?
And those states were Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Utah, okay? And which were predominantly white populated, you know, states, majority states. And once we got this information, and then we found out that under the Voting Rights Act, other prisoners in other states had challenges, but they lost, and they didn't pursue this all the way to the Supreme Court. So eventually, one group of prisoners in New York State filed a class action suit, and they ended up losing. And then finally, I filed a class action suit. And when I filed this class action suit, before I filed it, I reached out to every civil rights organization in the country, you know, and I still have the letters documenting this outreach, and tried to get them involved in this issue. And all of them, you know, that responded said that they were busy with other things, like trying to get a Confederate flag off of the state building in one of them southern states.